You're listening to the Joyous Podcast with Mike Carden, where we talk to the world's most interesting business thinkers about life and work and life. For show notes and other content referenced in this podcast, visit joyoushq.com/podcast. And now, here's Mike.
Hello and welcome to the Joyous Podcast. I'm Mike Carden, co-founder of Joyous, and my guest today is Vince Pizzica. Vince spent a decade of his career as an executive at Technicolor, most recently as the head of Corp Dev and Strategy, and then subsequently Vince sort of seems to have attached himself to board roles in some of the world's hottest content and content tech businesses. So great to have you on the show. Vince, welcome.
Thank you, Mike. It's good to be here.
And I've got to start by asking this: where in the world is Vince Pizzica today?
I'm in Brisbane.
Brisbane.
This is funny because if you asked me that 2 weeks ago, I would have said I was in India. A week ago, I was in California, and now Brisbane. Sunny Brisbane.
I think that of all the podcasts I've tried to schedule this year with many great thinkers like yourself, it's been the most challenging trying to find this time with you. And I think I've caught you in your car by the looks of it. So
yeah, people on the move in the car.
Excellent. Hey, so I'm going to start just with a very simple question because I made the introduction that you spent a bunch of your career at Technicolor or Technicolor, as I guess it's pronounced in France. Yeah. I think that's one of those businesses that people have heard the name of a lot. But what does it actually do, or what did it do?
Well, so think of it as the company that brought color to the movies. The early partners were people like Disney, like the first ever color cartoons by Disney were Technicolor. So if you go to a Disney museum in the Bay Area that's run by the Disney family, you'll see proudly partnered with Technicolor in their first colour productions, including Snow White and the like. So its history is, if you can imagine a startup trying to bring something new to the world in the early dawn of media entertainment as a filmed entertainment, they were the people that made it possible. But unfortunately, they went to the apex of popularity. So movies were brought to you in Technicolor, was. And then it got to the point where there was an antitrust action against Technicolor and it had to be unwound and shared their technology to their competitors, who subsequently brought them back down a little bit, a notch or two. And when I came there, they were a little bit out of touch with technology. So my role was to refresh the technology cycle for them.
And of course, I guess that's like, nearly 20 years ago, right? At that point.
Mm-hmm. 2008, I was there. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So 15 years ago, like that's in the, I guess, a big period of change for media and entertainment, right? So what's kind of going on at that point?
Well, so back in those days, you still had Netflix was sort of thinking about getting a streaming service going. It was going. They'd been doing DVD mailing. There was this film was still at its peak. So the year before I joined was the biggest year in the history of, when I say film, I mean like developing Kodak negatives and to making them, distribute them into cinema. So, and 3D was just coming to bear again as on its, I think, third iteration of being in cinema. It didn't work then either, but it was certainly a big thing at the time. So we had when I joined Technicolor, I've got to tell you the story because I joined Technicolor as it was called Thomson. I joined on 1st of September 2008. September 15 was a sort of day in infamy for the global financial crisis. And we'd been brought on board by an investor into the company called Silver Lake. And they decided that their $500 million convertible note had to be pulled off because, the world was melting down, so they wanted their cash back. And so we went from being sort of brought to a company with where the people who brought us on board had left. We had a $500 million hole just opened up on our balance sheet. And and the world was melting down. That was in the first 2 weeks of the company. Somewhere in there, I decided, well, together with my team, we worked through our way to change the company from Thomson to Technicolor as we took it through Chapter 11. So we were fortunately, in some ways, weak, just as the rest of the world went weak, and we could get some support from our customers because Technicolor, as you say, it's like a 100-year-old company that had was older than many of its customers. That, funny enough, like Disney needed us when they were starting.
Right.
DreamWorks Animation needed us when they were starting. So we had some good customer relationships to depend on. And in that time, we took the business through a transition away from film. So film was $600 million a year when we joined. It was zero within 3 years, and the business was completely gone.
Wow.
And we replaced it with visual effects, which was, up until recently, one of the most important trends in the industry. If we talked about the industry now, it'd be different. But visual effects was one of the main things that helped us get through that.
So just taking a step back, just from the perspective of your career, and I guess I have this conversation with most people on the podcast. How do you land at Technicolor at that point? Like, kind of, what's the Vince Pizzica origin story, to use the Marvel Universe term?
The Marvel Universe, yes, that's right. This is my little individual piece. So I started out in Australia in Telstra, as a little telecoms engineer. Got a good grounding in engineering coming out of the University of Queensland, and I guess I was always drawn to big network problems, and I think it's always important with an engineering background to go deep in something and then sort of get a chance to pull back, and from there learn how to diversify. So for various good and bad reasons, as I sort of went through my early career, competition was introduced to Australia, and I found myself, for good or bad, on some of the teams that were negotiating with this little company come out of Singapore that won the license, and working with the government about what the rules should be. So I got elevated up into a fairly high-profile job fairly early on in my career, and I was able to, as a result, I think I just had, I will say, good luck, but being in the right place at the right time, but also having a skill set that was about broadening the topic, not just being limited by the thing in front of you, and sort of thinking a bit about the implications of stuff. I got to the point where I did sort of shoot through the ranks at Telstra fairly young age, and I got to myself where I was like, I wasn't smart enough to call myself CTO because I was the director of technology strategy and architecture. I was executive director, I think, or something. Anyway, the guy that replaced me was Hugh Bradlow, and he called himself CTO, and I said, why didn't I call myself CTO? Obviously, it doesn't sound right. But he's a good guy, and so he was a real CTO for sure. But I got to the point at my career at Telstra that I just felt constrained a little bit, and I didn't want to just be a networks person. I didn't want to just be in Australia. I wanted to expand my horizons. So I took a 6-month break, and my wife and I, she wasn't my wife at the time, we went backpacking. Went backpacking to South America and India, and sort of opened the horizons a bit, came back and started a career in the vendor side of the world, which took me to Shanghai. So I lived in Shanghai for 4 years, but I got a better grounding in business and selling and sort of being an engineer to selling. And it was in that window, having diversified my global perspective, I guess, but also a broader set of things than just networking, where I got exposed to corporate development in a way. It was the merger between Alcatel and Lucent, and I discovered, and your brother knows this only too well, the good and bad of mergers. One thing it's easy to do when you're on the side of something like that is to realize what went right and what went wrong more easily than people who are in the middle of the cooking, so to speak. I just couldn't, I didn't want to be a part of that anymore. So I left, and so did my boss, who was Frederick Rose. And we got approached because we were a management team that had done quite well in Alcatel. And even under Alcatel Lucent, we've grown, focused on growth, focused on technology change, turning around business. And the people who were on the board of Thomson at the time were looking for a new executive team. So they approached Frederick. Fred asked me to join, and we joined together. But it was we both, Fred and I both sort of decided that this is what we wanted to do because it was a mess. I can say that now because it's even more of a mess now than it was when we came on board. But when we knew if we fixed it, we would be heroes. But if we didn't fix it, everyone would say, well, it wasn't their fault. So
right.
So we took it
low-risk option.
Low-risk option. Went from less than 50 cents and took it through a Chapter 11. It went up to €7. Trebled in revenue, all that sort of stuff. I got at various times that period of time when the world was melting down around us, so we learned some skills pretty quickly. And ever since then, that transformational skill becomes one of the sort of more fundamental things you can keep using over and over again.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, like you mentioned that there's effectively a $600 million film business that disappears in 3 years, right? Yeah. We had this conversation with Alex Badenoch, who's also ex-Telstra, and she was telling us about the period where Telstra and NBN was spun off from Telstra, and at that point, NBN was about the size of Qantas, and so you go through these like giant whacks to the business effectively, and you can only deal with them if you have a transformational mindset, because that's where you are. Disclaimer in there too. You mentioned you worked with my brother Phil at Alcatel-Lucent. So I guess that for the listeners, that's where this connection comes in, right? That's in Paris? Yeah, is that when?
Well, so I was CTO of Alcatel for Asia Pacific, and we were doing business from the Australian side of the Tasman with Telecom New Zealand in this big transformational outsourcing project. And I remember, I don't want to say anything negative, but I can remember thinking at the time, we just do not have the skill sets in this company to do what we're trying to do. And so I wanted to find someone who was not part of the telco traditional culture, who understood business problems and business solutions, and who was a little bit more entrepreneurial. And your brother fit. I was introduced to him, and he came on board, and it was fundamentally important to us being successful with that project.
Hey, so getting back to Technicolor and to, I guess, media film, entertainment. Yeah.
I must say, by the way, that when I was in telecoms, I used to explain to people, you're in telecoms, what do you do? Well, I make it possible so that your phone call will work. Oh, okay. That sounds really interesting. Just to move on to something else. Now I say, well, I was involved in making The Lion King. Oh, wow. It's a much better conversation at parties, let me tell you.
So talk me through, that period of transformation at Technicolor, and then where that lands us today, because my goodness, that industry is just in constant flux, right?
Yeah. Well, so it was interesting because, of course, one of the reasons we landed at Technicolor is or Thomson was the telecom link. And you look at something like the media entertainment industry and say, oh my God, there's no process there at all. It's all creatives. It's highly concentrated into Hollywood, blah, blah, blah. But I am always one of those sort of people that sort of looks at things the way they could be, and tries to find the sort of where the pattern recognition identifies things that work. And when I came in, Thomson was essentially the French equivalent of General Electric. So it was dozens of businesses doing all things. In fact, we were in the consumer electronics iteration of Thomson. Previous to that, they'd made tanks and nuclear weapons and exocet missiles.
Classic French conglomerate.
Yes, classic conquering the world, which this is a podcast. I don't want to be interrupted by the French Secret Service, so I won't say anything at all about the French government. It was an interesting. So it got split into two: a defence force, which became Thales, and Thomson Electronics. And we came on board when it was doing too much. Like it was, they had one business that was the world's largest provider of PSTN fixed phones that's sitting in your home. You connect with a copper wire and you dial. Most of the people today don't know what those are, but they had 40% market share in North America, and they were losing money on every phone they sold. I was like, okay, how do you do that, guys? How do you when you come in on something like that, how do you get to the point where you've got 40% market share and you can't make money? But it was things like going through about 16 different businesses and trying to work out addressable market, direction, right to compete, all the stuff that the business girls tell you need to do, but you're doing it in an accelerated environment. So we went through those 16 businesses, basically got rid of half of them. Some of them we sold, some of them we just shut down, like that phone business. When you own 20% share and you can't make money, you just shut that business. But there was this little business in there doing visual effects, and we looked at the film business. You could see that like people who were living in it really couldn't see it because they were there every day dealing with the customers and they're thinking about contracts, and you talk to them about the future of the film industry, they go, it's not good. But they didn't know how to get out of it. So we knew we had to find something while we still had it's always good to be in a situation where your customers need you because you're one of only two suppliers. So you can use that to, I won't say leverage, but to create opportunities for growth. And so the transformation had to occur. So it was we knew we had to get new skill sets, we had to and new business models, all that sort of stuff. So one of the businesses we found was this visual effects business in London called MPC, or Motion Picture Company. And everyone at the time inside the French company was saying, just sell it, get rid of it. It's losing money. It was doing $30 million a year. It was losing 10. That's pretty impressive. But we, I looked at it, went together with my team. We said, this is actually, every dynamic, every metric that tells you this business was, the market was just doubling every 2 or 3 years. So if you could get market share and you had a value proposition that worked, and it looked to me like an outsourcing business that I knew because I'd done that at Alcatel. So we just had to work out how to go about doing it properly. So we hired new people. We brought in Tim Sunoff from outside, so a high-powered exec that knew what he was doing. And one of the things we had said to him was, we think it might be important to do an Indian back office to this. And he said, well, I tried to do an Indian back office when I was at Sony ImageWorks. Didn't work, but I know what I did wrong. so we got him going. But it was, for me, it was that change of some fresh faces, finding talent inside the organization, clearing out the noise, because you had to, but also because there were good people who just were trapped inside the same problem, not looking any further than they needed to look. So there was a lot of stuff. One of the things I did early on, have you ever heard of GBN or Global Business Networks? They're a consulting company that worked with Shell in the early 70s to do scenario planning that they anticipated particularly well the Middle East crisis in the 70s. And so I felt we needed something that was more longer distance than the way we're thinking. So I did some work with them on the 2030 vision for media entertainment. And that was about creating the North Stars and the things that we could be comfortable about. We brought in script writers, futurists, and industry executives. It was one of those absolutely ground zero, outside the company as well as inside. And we painted a vision for the industry that at the time, I still go back to it every now and then because, we've been tracking pretty well to it. But one of the things that helped me understand was that the industry had been based around a certain business model since the dawn of film and the dawn of any form of electronic communication, and that there was natural cycles in it. And we were just coming to the end of the cycle in film. That seems hard to believe for something that's 100 years old, but scarcity is the issue, right? So when you went to see a film, you had the seats in a cinema, and that's all you had. So it was the scarcity of distribution meant that the distribution players had a lot more power. But then Netflix was proving that distribution could be something different. And in that window, we could see Netflix changing the licensing model, going to streaming, and lots of stuff. And you said, okay, that's just obvious. It was obvious what was going to happen that was going to be similar to what happened to music and what happened to radio. So it was just a question of understanding the technology disruptions that were going to occur between now and when it happened, and sort of anticipating how we could ride the curve, which was including things like visual effects being a larger part of the content cycle, etc. So it was, for me, the scenario planning work helped us position to people, both inside the company and outside the company, what we were doing with the business.
So that was a plan, I guess, now 15 years ago for where we would be at in 2030, which is 7 years from now. So I guess you're 3/4 of the way through that cycle or something, like maybe 2/3 of the way through. Yeah, what in that vision was bang on, and what is the stuff where you go like, oh, wow, we got that wrong?
Well, so we created, in the scenario planning exercises, you do 2 axes of uncertainty. So we had different names for them, but essentially one axis of uncertainty was to the extent that content was premium or not. So premium versus free business model, advertising driven, community generated, or versus the cost of channel or the distribution model. So in the top left-hand corner, which is always typically where you start, premium content, Hollywood driven, service providers driving it out, things like cable operators and so on. So pay for subscriptions for cable access and things like that. And then, as I said, if you look at all the disruptions over 10, 20 years, you say, well, distribution is going to go to zero. That's pretty clear. I mean, coming from the telco market, that was even more obvious to me. But the question is, what would happen to how we valued content? That was the stuff that. So what trajectory? So there's one thing to say, pretty obvious, it's going to go to low value distribution and low value content. That you could predict, I guess. But the question is, how would you get there? And what role? It's never about one or the other. Nothing exists in between. It's always about both coexisting and what's dominant and what's not dominant. Right. So clearly we're still going to have Hollywood movies. But if you back in 2008 saying, I think the number of cinema productions that are going to go, the productions that are going to go to cinema as a percentage of the total volume of the market will drop below sort of 5%, and then we'll go from something like 200 features a year to less than 20. People will last, right? But the journey to get there is actually inevitable. In fact, if you go from when there was nothing but cinema, you know what the peak of cinematic entertainment was, the value contribution to GDP or share of wallet for filmed entertainment was for distribution of cinema. What year was that, do you think?
Oh, I see. So this is an interesting question, right? Because I'm going to say like it's 2005, but I'm sure you're going to tell me it's like 1952, aren't you?
Yeah, no, it's in the 20s.
Is that right? Yeah.
It's in the 20s, yeah. Remember, film started before radio. So the thing that actually took film off of the peak, when the only form of entertainment you had was to go to the cinema, really. There wasn't radio. You had books, you had theatre and plays and vaudeville, things like that, and you had cinema.
So if you're thinking about it as if you think about it as share of GDP, it's like it peaks in the 20s, and that's just a long decline from then on in.
It's a long decline. That's what I said. So the contribution per seat on an adjusted basis from the 20s has been going down. And then you think about use of capital, right? You've got a cinema that sits empty for most of the day and most of the week, and then there's only so it's not the ROIC is just not great. So the decline of cinema was kind of obvious, but the issue is we are, as humans, we have always wanted to be entertained. That's like when I was pitching this to investors, it was as long as since there was cave drawings, we wanted to be entertained. The business model for it has changed, and the technology has changed. And every time we introduced new media, so we went from cave drawings to telling stories around the campfire to eventually writing things down. Then eventually creating a press that changed distribution. It's all the fundamentals of business, really, that scale a business like that. So what's become different is, of course, that now with a camera and distribution being relatively slow, you can reach large audiences globally relatively quickly. But we are, as people, drawn to as a race, we're drawn to great stories and great characters. And so as long as you're tapping back to what, like the value chain, a creative who creates a great story, a consumer who wants to hear and understand that story, it's everything in between that is the stuff that changes.
That's a fascinating way of thinking about it. So then right at the moment, I mean, are we kind of in some separate inflection point now? Like, we're talking about a kind of slow decline of cinema, but that bit of connecting the storyteller to the story absorber, the teller to the telly. There's so much technological and social change at the moment. So what happens now?
Well, so I talked about 2 degrees of uncertainty, sort of creating a content and distribution. Distribution really started to dramatically change in the mid 2010s. And CDNs and Netflix and sort of the idea of streaming changed a lot of things. YouTube probably was the first one in that category. So when you look at distribution technology, distribution suppliers, the supply chain of distribution shifted fundamentally during the 2010s. But when you go into production, and actually producing the content that was going to be distributed, that hasn't changed since. I mean, we still talk about dailies, which is something that comes out of a camera. We haven't had cameras with film for decades, as I said. So, so really the processes and everything, even some of the technology elements, haven't changed on the production side. And production has been highly concentrated into a small number of players that dominated since that period of the 20s when Hollywood, the so-called golden era of Hollywood, became the center of production. So I've mentioned that distribution has been sort of the key point in getting something published. So if you had a good idea for a story or a character or something you wanted to take to market in content, you had to find a distributor who would fund that process. And so what they were trying to produce was a piece of, first it was something for the cinema, then it was something for television, then it was something for cable, then now the last few years has been streaming. But the actual production of that hadn't changed in 100 years. The way you did it, the roles, the director, all that stuff. There'd been some tweaking with technology, but digital, but it was much the same stuff. now with what we've seen with the strikes, we can come back and talk about that in a moment. But just generally, the lower cost of production, lower cost of distribution, you don't need, if you're a content owner, to necessarily be kowtowing. I don't say that with deference to the big studio guys, to what a distributor wants. You can find different ways to get your product to market to reach audiences. And the strikes have been pushing the volume of cost down as well. So now it's more affordable for people who have a good idea in content to take it to market. And the final piece is that it's really an advertising-driven model that's going to dominate in the market over the next years. Funny, radio started with advertising, TV started with advertising. Advertising, like love it or hate it, it is a very important part of this business model. With streaming, I can get much better returns on advertising. So now if I'm a content owner, a content creator, low cost of production, I can actually reach large audiences, large enough audiences, if the advertising dollar is good enough for that audience, to get my content made by someone who invests in what I want, not be kowtowing to a larger producer. So I think that's the next 5 to 10 years, the strikes, the market, everything like that is all driving towards this idea that if you're a YouTube creator or an Instagram creator, one of the challenges you've got is that too much of your advertising revenue is being taken by the platforms. If you can find ways to go more directly to market, the audiences are huge. Like the creator market's about 25 to 50 million people, depending on who you want to talk to about it. The number of people actually earning over $100,000 a year. And remember, they're only getting a ridiculously small share of the advertising revenue. They're making a lot, 10, 20 times that for their brands. There's probably about 2 to 5 million people in that range that are making that sort of money. And then there's some that are making huge amounts of money. So I honestly think that's where you'll see the big shifts in content creation. And remembering you now monetize your content, not just by the story. It doesn't have to be by a feature-length movie in the cinema. It can be by a podcast. It can be by the shirt that someone's wearing. It's not this particular shirt. This is not a very good one. But it could be a shirt or a scene or a landscape that you have in your content, that becomes a part of the monetization. And it can also be translating into the digital world. So it can be in a game, it can be in your Apple Provision glasses world, metaverses, etc. So the opportunity for monetization isn't limited just to telling a story in a linear way on television. And I think that's the next 10 years are about production changing to absorb that different business model.
So that's no different than kind of George Lucas releasing Star Wars and selling lots and lots of figurines and making more money out of the figurines and out of the movie in the initial instance, is it? It's like there's lots of different ways of monetizing content.
He fell into that, right? Because he had to give away. The budget increased, so he was looking for some reason to give more rights of distribution to Fox, and so he said, "But I'll keep all of the licensing, product licensing stuff." He had no idea. It wasn't a strategy per se, but the other thing that is a strategy is Disney is the master of this world. This is no different to what Disney's been doing for the last 50 years or so. I have a diagram that was drawn, I think, by Disney himself, Walt Disney himself, but it's a 1957 branded chart that explains the business model of Disney. And you look at it now and you go, that's exactly their business model now. That's no different. Licensing of content and characters goes into theme parks, goes into television, books, comics. It was just this fantastic chart. And that was in 1957. So it's not new, no, not at all. It's just that the problem was in the past, distribution controlled monetization. And that's not true anymore.
Hey, now you said that the actors' strike has pushed down the price of content creation. But just to my mind, surely actors are striking because they want more money and better conditions. And isn't that in a traditional labour market model going to push the price of content production up? Yeah.
Well, so there's other things, there are other factors in the budget. The point of the studio, the guilds has been, actually our percentage of the budget is relatively small. The biggest problem is not so much what you're paying the actors; it's the fact that the return on investment and the risk on creating content is quite different. When you only had a certain number of TV channels and cinemas productions each year, even if you made a screw up, you still made money. And they were very clever in their licensing models. different release date in the UK versus Australia versus the US, and so they made different release dates for film going to the cinema versus going to the aeroplane, going to cable. So they were masters in scarcity management. When scarcity is not the issue anymore, you make a piece of content, and if the audience doesn't like it, they don't watch it.
Yeah.
So now my risk on making investments is much higher. So, and you've seen that this last couple of years. Who's going to Marvel movies these days? Who's going to DC movies? But those things have been costing hundreds of millions of dollars. The risk is just too high. So budgets are shrinking down more generally because the risk that you're taking when you make an investment in content is much higher. And visual effects are coming out, and so on and so on. So there's actually, if you want to be an actor, if your daughter comes to you or son comes up to you and says, "I want to be an actor," maybe you should think twice about that. That's not a great career. I think what the strikes have done is made it that if you want to be an actor, you can make an income. That's for sure. But there's going to be less projects from the studio system. If you want to be an actor, like if you want to be a singer, go and perform. If you want to be an actor, go and perform. And there'll be theatre, there'll be live performances. We are, as humans, again, drawn to live events, things that happen in real time or that are part of a group experience. So acting is one of those. And I think that good actors will always be able to make money.
Yeah, I was reflecting when you were saying that. My good friend of mine works for UIP and in the distribution side of pictures, right? And she would tell me about 20 years ago, like in the time where you'd have like Scary Movie 7 or something, and it was just right. It was because
all that originality that comes in the movie.
Just literally because people would be going, I want to go to see this particular hot movie at the moment, I don't know, and it's on at 8 p.m. and you get there and it's sold out. But there's a movie on at 8:15 and that movie is Scary Movie 7. And you go like, I went to Scary Movie 6, was okay. We're out already. Why don't we go to it? Yeah. And that kind of model it like we're going to the cinema and we're going to spend money. Yeah. And that's the first decision is just gone, isn't it? Like no one, you're content centric when you go out these days. Yeah.
Right. And, the thing that we talk about discovery of content being a sort of big thing because in the past you had the grid and you had TV Guide or whatever, and if you're talking not about cinema, talking about television, there was only 5 channels for a while. So if you didn't like it too bad, then you got the DVR, so you could time shift it a bit. But then when cable came out and there was hundreds of channels, you started to find it hard to find what you wanted to watch at any one time, and streaming just blew that to pieces.
Mm-hmm. Hey, so just the kind of last question for me here. What's the impact of AI on content production? Like, is that a quick answer?
I think it's exciting, but it's a bit like saying AI is not going to take your job. Someone using AI is going to take your job. And creative industries are very human. Generative AI is showing that you can actually make life simpler. So there's a lot of... We have difficulty in the creative industry in taking what's going on inside some creative's head and putting it in a piece of paper or in a format that other people can enjoy. And part of that is like sketching, in the creative phases of TV shows or movies is very much about trying to extract the vision and put it into a format that other people can make it. So some of the generative AI stuff there is actually that, right? You say some of the things you're trying to do in your head and something comes out and it's not what you want, but it helps you get your mind around what you do want. So shortening the cycle of production is going to be an important part of what generative AI does. Yes, it will take away some manual jobs or some people jobs, but if you're in charge of what's going on with it, it'll be fine. Where it gets interesting is literally acting, because I do think like script writing. As I said, you're going to use AI to be more effective, be more productive. There's the learning model issues that are legal issues more than they are technical issues, and I think we can actually, with a bit of honesty and transparency, we can fix those ones. Just like, we never, accounting was never destroyed by Excel. I don't think script writing jobs are going to be destroyed by AI unless you decide that you don't want to change with the technology. But with acting, it's a bit different because there's a lot of roles. Like even today now, if you see a scene with a football game, there's a pretty good chance in the movie that there's no one in the audience. There's no one in the stadium. It's all digitally acted. All the Lord of the Rings things, most of those soldiers that are fighting or fighters, they're not real. Now I can get to the point where people who may even have speaking roles not be real, and that's where people start getting freaked out. But like I said, if you want to perform as an actor, it's best to focus on the importance of how your individual performance. You will never get an AI to do the humanity of a performance that reacts in real time to the audience and things like that. So I do think acting is going to shift more to live performance and performance-based experiences. What I think is interesting is that, yes, an avatar of a person can scale you up a lot more. So there's advertising, there's low value things. Like AI will have a big impact on the low value stuff, and it'll make the human stuff much more valuable, and therefore generate a better return for people who are humans that are contributing to it. So that's maybe a long-winded answer to it, but I don't feel threatened by it.
You were mentioning before your involvement in, is it likeness licensing? Is that the
likeness licensing? Yeah.
Now that to me seems right at the kind of the scary sci-fi edge of the impact of AI on content. Talk me through that.
So likeness licensing is there's a few different variations of it. It's been happening for a while. Like Elvis Presley still has an agent at Authentic Brands now, right? You can still get Elvis Presley to perform for you in different ways. Sometimes it's just imagery, but the idea that an avatar will be able to do it is fine. I do like the idea that James Dean, with the blessing of the estate, I mean, to some extent. So there's the two versions, right? There's I'm alive today, and either without my permission or even with my permission, how do I make sure that I participate using these avatars, and how do I prevent people from doing something about that? But there was a landmark case, just to throw in some legal stuff for fun. The landmark case in the Supreme Court earlier this year, where Andy Warhol and Prince were suing each other over an image of Prince that Andy Warhol had turned into a piece of art. It's the estates now, because it's been going for a while. But the estate of Prince won because the Supreme Court decided that, in fact, the audience for the art that Andy Warhol had created was the same audience as Prince's audiences would be for normal entertainment. So they now if you ever go and look into it, you'll see that it's quite a well-defined, unusual for the US Supreme Court, well-defined set of rules that they put in place there. So all of this, of course, you can always terms and condition yourself into trouble in a license or an agreement. But if someone's using your image or using the image of a dead person, you have if you're the owner of that property, of that likeness, you have a right to protect it, and you have a right to a license. If it's obviously the value, my rights to my likeness is not as much as Elvis Presley. I know that, and much as I'd like it to be different, it will be different. But the idea of then encapsulating the image, simple things like just the image is one thing, the voice is another, the ingesting every performance by Elvis Presley as an actor, and then being able to create an avatar that he could do that. That's a business. That's a business for the estate, because the estate now is managing the returns on it. It's a bit different for Steph Curry, who maybe he wants to practice basketball more instead of doing Subway ads or some other ads. So his avatar can go and do it. And if you think this is fanciful, it's there are already people doing this. There's a startup in the Bay Area that went from pre-seed in March to taking $150 million in a Series A last month, called Character.ai, and it's doing pretty much what I just said. So for a subscription, you can have chats with Steph Curry if he's one of the characters that pop up. But the business model it's more the business model than the technology, and it's more about making sure you're protecting people's rights.
Well, on that note of a dead Prince suing a dead Andy Warhol, I think we'll bring it to a close. I think the thing which I've taken most from all of us, Vince, is despite a long history of disruption in entertainment and kind of an increasing pace of that recently, it is still fundamentally an industry driven by this idea that there's humans, an audience that wants to have stories told to them by creative people, and that mechanism is still the fundamental driver of it. It's interesting to hear, even at the most grandiose corporate strategy level, that's still the most well understood piece of the model.
Yeah. Often with transformations, what it is, you have to get back to the real basics of what it is that makes something successful or not. And for me, I learned that in 2008, and I think it's still true. Connecting a great story and character to its audience, whatever's in between, is going to change. But those two things aren't going to change. There might be a time when machines are telling stories for other machines, But we're a little bit away from that one.
Thank you very much for your time, Vince. It's always a pleasure chatting.
Thank you for your time. It was great fun.
This has been the Joyous Podcast, brought to you by Joyous, human conversations and AI analytics in one. Find out more at joyoushq.com. If you liked this show, make sure to give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. This episode of the Joyous Podcast was hosted by Mike Carden and produced by Kai Crow, Karen Rayner, and Brandon Berman. Thanks for joining us. And remember, everyone deserves to be joyous.